How's it going, everyone? We gotta talk about something I think everybody always likes to hear about, and that is how Sony is doing from a business standpoint, and particularly something absolutely incredible about Black Myth Wukong and the success of that game and what it offered to PlayStation, offering them a gigantic quarter even after having the disaster that was one Concord. We'll talk all about that. IGN's got a pretty in-depth article. And speaking of business, got a bit of an update on the PS5 Pro and its sales numbers, which are fairly interesting. We'll talk that at the end of this video, but Black Myth Wukong, of course, getting its physical release later this year. I know a lot of you guys are excited about that, but the game has been available digitally. And what's interesting is that Sony's video game business, as reported by Sony's Game and Network Services division, which includes PlayStation, brought in 1,071.5 billion yen, that's approximately $7 billion in conversion, during the second quarter of the fiscal year. Second quarter of the fiscal year is July to September of 2024. That's a significant increase, as was noted, of 12% year over year. Sony said profit tripled to 138.8 billion yen, approximately $911 million, up a whopping 184%. Those positive results were good enough for Sony to raise its financial forecast as well. Sony said that the boost in revenue came down to an increase in sales of non-first-party games, including add-on content, as well as the impact of foreign exchange rates and an increasing in sales from network services, mainly from PlayStation Plus. And given that Black Myth Wukong was the biggest game release in that quarter, there was also EA Sports FC 25. However, Sony specifically did mention a new sports title and an action RPG from China, that being Black Myth Wukong, for PlayStation sales success in this quarter. Remember, Concord was a gigantic disaster, and even with that, Black Myth Wukong did so well to counteract that and provide Sony a gigantic quarter. Even more important than all of that, and I don't know if you want to look at this as funny or kind of sad, Black Myth Wukong is a game that Sony just lucked into exclusivity. Nobody knows why, but the general consensus, the general belief is that Black Myth Wukong is a game that could not run on the Xbox Series S, thus the Xbox version had to be postponed. It is supposed to come to Xbox at some point, but now we are how many months removed from the release of Black Myth Wukong? Approaching 3 months. I doubt it comes out by the end of this year. And remember what I always say about the majority of single-player games like a Black Myth Wukong, the bulk of the success, the bulk of the attention of a game comes in that first, honestly, week. Maybe you can extend it to a month, 2 months for some games, but really it is that first week, and then the game usually quiets down. This is true for all games, but live service games, the idea is to generate sustainable interest. That's not the case with a game like Black Myth Wukong. You're selling that game at $60 on launch. If you can get a gigantic amount of sales at launch, it doesn't make a difference if it's at launch or if it's later on. You're getting those sales and you're getting that $60. That's the goal. So the thing is, there's a reason why Sony pays so much money for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth timed exclusivity. There's a reason why Microsoft paid for it in the past for Rise of the Tomb Raider timed exclusivity. It's because that 1 year window that they get the game as an exclusive, that is more than enough time for them to promote the game pretty much as a lifetime exclusive, because the interest inherently is in that initial period. Black Myth Wukong was served on a silver platter to Sony as an exclusive that they didn't have to pay for, and they just made out like bandits, getting one of, if not the biggest success story in gaming of the year. I would throw Black Myth Wukong in there with Stellar Blade, but Black Myth Wukong far more successful given its impact in China. You could throw like a Sparking Zero in there in terms of games that I don't think a lot of people saw being as successful as they were, but Wukong is from an unknown studio, new IP, entering into a new market as well. The fact that Xbox missed out on Black Myth Wukong, I feel like there is not a big enough deal about how big of a fumble that was, and I would be so curious to know the inside conversations of what happened. We never even got a reason as far as why Wukong was pushed back. I am just, and many of us have just come to the conclusion that, hey, it happened with Baldur's Gate 3, And if it happened with Baldur's Gate 3, you would think it would happen with Black Myth Wukong. Mind you, Black Myth Wukong is a game that had some technical shortcomings on the PS5 base console. Hopefully we get a pro patch at some point, but you know, playing that game on the PS5, you could definitely get the sense, okay, I could definitely see this game having some issues on the Series S, but if that is what happened, there should have been a sit-down conversation. You should have been able to make it work where maybe you can only launch it on the Series X. I get that Microsoft doesn't want to do that and the games need to have parity, and given that the Series S entered the market, like, I feel like that, well, once it's in the market, you kind of have to stick to that, given you sold the console on that premise. But it is just a gigantic, gargantuan fumble, especially in a year where everybody knows PlayStation's had a lackluster first-party output this year. So when they get gifted exclusives, oh my goodness, like, that's just the biggest W you could give to Sony. And while some people can be like, oh, that's a PlayStation fanboy way of speaking. Guys, I don't want this to happen. This is ultimately not good for the PlayStation consumer because that just lets PlayStation get even more power. What I would have rather happen is that there being a disaster like Concord, okay, face the consequence of that disaster and don't have a fake exclusive, or, you know, it is a real console exclusive, but you get the idea, an exclusive that just became an exclusive almost by necessity, you know, just kind of saving you. Like, that's not ideal in terms of getting PlayStation to do what I want them to do. Like, I want them to be punished for the Concord disaster and hopefully course correct, but I don't know if that's going to entirely be the case. The reality is, even if Black Myth Wukong did release on the Xbox, predominantly it would be sold on PlayStation, and the biggest sales came from China, and I don't know what console the Chinese market would gravitate towards, but we did hear PlayStation 5s were selling out with the release of Black Myth Wukong. Think about that for a second. Black Myth Wukong over here stateside was a big game. Over in China, it was a legitimate, like, cultural event. Maybe that's a little bit of, you know, pushing it, but you look at those player numbers, like, cultural event, it makes it sound like it was like a holiday or something, but it was an event, so to speak. A big game like that coming out of the Chinese market, and to miss out on the game, I'm sorry. That is just a gigantic L by Microsoft. Even if it was gonna always sell better on PlayStation, missing out on Black Myth Wukong, I feel like Microsoft doesn't get crapped on enough for that, and they absolutely deserve to get crapped on. Whatever the reason is, that's one of those games that you should have, you know, moved heaven and earth to try to get that game on your platform, and it was impossible to see just how big Black Myth was gonna be, but we had been talking about it leading up to the release. We knew it was gonna be a game with a lot of interest. It was really gonna come down to whether or not the game was good, and ultimately it was really effing good, so it just propelled it even higher, but there you go with that. Lastly, I do want to talk a little bit about the PS5 Pro. Pre-orders are said to be slightly stronger than the PlayStation 4 Pro during the same period, and it was noted it's a high-end product targeted at core customers, so we haven't been eyeing a large sales plan to begin with. I'm under the impression that the product is performing slightly stronger than the pre-orders of the PS4 Pro during the same period, so I don't think it's adversely affecting the product sales plan. The PS5 Pro and the scrutiny it's under, I get it, the price point is crazy, the lack of the disk drive I think is insane, but it was always an option, it was a premium option, and what I like in gaming is there to be a lot of options available. You'll hear me bug out at Sony a lot, like, if anybody craps on Sony, it's me, and I really get annoyed when they strip away options and they lessen the value for your regular consumer. I don't have that big of a microscope on the PS5 Pro because if you're picking up a PS5 Pro, you're probably at a pretty healthy place in life financially, and you are one of the absolute core consumers that love PlayStation. This isn't to attract a new audience to PS5. The base console is still available, so, you know, it is what it is. What I get annoyed by PlayStation is, you know, things like PlayStation Plus going up in price because that affects the general community. Things, even basic things like Dino Crisis not being available to buy standalone. That's Sony stripping away option from the consumer. And things like, obviously, Horizon Zero Dawn remasters, them doubling the price of Horizon Zero Dawn, and then turn around releasing remastered $50 for that now, instead of being able to buy HZD for $20. Those are the stuff that annoys me, because that also sets the precedent of PlayStation taking advantage of their consumers that's just their general consumer, not their absolute hardcore consumer, which, you know, Sony's always going to take advantage of their absolute hardcore because they can. That's the reality. They can take advantage of those people because they'll live and die with with PlayStation, and, you know, it is what it is. Maybe they'll look at something like the PS5 Pro and think, hey, people bought the PS5 Pro, let's price the next-gen console at the same price point. But I think if you get into that territory, like, ultimately, you're gonna push people a little bit too far. The PS5 Pro, it's fine as an optional console. I would say that if it was at $650 with the disk drive included, I think people would have been fine with it. It's the $700, no disk drive included, that is just, like, so wild to me. But, you know, I'm not gonna scrutinize it to a crazy extent just because it is this premium baller option, so to speak, for people to pick up, and the base console still exists, and the base console still gives you pretty solid performance. That's why I haven't, like, just had meltdowns over it. I did initially with the lack of the disk drive, but even after that, it's just like, bro, we got bigger things to worry about. As far as the regular PlayStation consumer is concerned, the lack of first-party titles, PlayStation Plus going up in price, stripping away options, like, those are the elements that affect a larger amount of users that, you know, I get more so annoyed with. But that's my 2 cents, and I'm sure a lot of you guys will disagree with that. But that is going to do it for me. Again, interesting notes on Black Myth Wukong's success. That game is just a colossal success, and people should really study a lot of elements of that game. If you know what I mean about how that game was promoted, I think it just goes to show it's the kind of game that people get excited for. And PS5 Pro looking to do slightly stronger than the PS4 Pro during the same period. That's going to do it for me. Let me know all of your thoughts in the comment section down below. Sound off there. Thank you for watching, and goodbye. Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure to hit the subscribe button, and if you're already subscribed, do us a favor and hit the bell icon. This way you'll be notified whenever we post a new video. That's the best way to keep up with all of our uploads, and we usually try to upload 2 videos a day. And with the bell icon hit, you'll be notified whenever we do upload a video. As always, thanks for watching.